Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now via Skype from Fremont, Nebraska is Ben Sasse. Currently, he is the president of Midlands College, and he's running as a Republican for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated in Nebraska by Mike Johanns, who is stepping down after one term in office. It's good to have you with us, Ben.
John, good to be with you. Thanks.
So we've just seen this two-year budget deal passed in the House with overwhelming support from House Republicans. Now, that deal has also highlighted the rift between Tea Party conservatives and the GOP establishment. While House Speaker John Boehner has blasted outside grassroots groups, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's going to vote no. So what's your take on the Ryan Murray budget deal?
Yeah, I think the place to start with is just how bizarre it is that the Senate Democrats won't allow us to have a conversation about the real issue. I know that a lot of the Tea Party and establishment divide conversations are, interesting and salacious, and I get why there's media interest in it. But I think the core issue to start at is Senate Democrats don't want to talk about the real issue that's driving long-term debt and deficit and why we're loading up our kids with things that are totally unsustainable.
And what would those, what do you think they should be talking about?
This is the time for entitlement reform. We've made promises. This Congress has made promises that don't add up. They've been doing it for decades. And the reason we haven't passed a budget in the U.S. in 5.5 years is because they can't make all the math work on the promises that they've made. And it's time to have adults actually have a real conversation. Entitlement reform should be happening now.
And so on a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed were you that Paul Ryan was not able to get any of that entitlement reform, issue into this two-year deal?
I think it's a fair question on the 1 to 10, but I think in a way this was already baked in last October. It became pretty clear in October that this Congress plans to punt for a real long time. So I don't know how to assess. I haven't read this current deal, so I don't know how to assess how this comes out relative to what our expectations might have been. But going way back to October, I think it was pretty clear that the Congress is planning to punt for 2 years.
Now, out of all the GOP Senate primary candidates out there, you've been, I guess all of them have been very vocal about the push to defund or repeal Obamacare. You worked as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services under George W. Bush. Now, I know there's no one out there who can argue that the rollout of healthcare.gov was anything but a disaster, but I wanted to get your takeaway on current Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius and the way that she's handled the response to the botched rollout. Now, if you were serving under her, if you were her assistant, would you resign?
Yeah, I don't know what Secretary Sebelius is doing other than envisioning herself as some sort of super legislator that can just rewrite a law again and again and again and again and constantly cry do-over and not have the media hold them accountable to the numbers they use. Right now, the #1 driver of growing uninsurance in America is Obamacare. Obamacare has pushed more than 5 million Americans out of the individual insurance market in the last, 60, 70 days. And she's claiming, 300,000 enrollments, and then she can't define the term enrollment, and it turns out none of these people have paid for anything. It's laughable. It's Banana Republic-like in terms of what they're doing, and every week or 2 weeks, she just resets the goalposts. It's really an embarrassment.
And we haven't really, in a lot of situations, the president would replace somebody like that who's embattled. Why do you think that the president has kind of stood beside her throughout this?
To be honest, I think there's an unbelievably cynical view of the American public in this administration. And their view is that they can always just sort of shake and rattle a shiny thing over here the way you distract a kid who's crying for more candy. They think that the media is not going to hold them to account to whatever pledges they make every 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they'll just constantly hit restart. I think if the president fired Kathleen Sebelius and had to confirm somebody else, there would be a real conversation nationally about the fact that they have promised things again and again and again that just haven't been true and appear regularly to have been knowingly untrue. I think PolitiFact just came out yesterday and named the lie of the year is that if you like your health plan, you can keep it. But the problem is that was the lie of the year in 2009 and in 2010. This is the level of checks and balances we have in the government between the executive and the legislative branch, and this is the kind of derelict media we have that finally 3.5 years late, well after the legislation was passed, 3 years since then Speaker Nancy Pelosi said we need to pass it to then read it and find out what's in it. Now journalists say, well, it turned out the administration was lying. That was pretty obvious to all adults who were actually looking in the bill 3 years ago.
Yeah, as you look at this with the Affordable Care Act, obviously that's going to be the key issue in 2014. But And I don't think there's anybody in your primary race right now who is going to take a different stance other than wanting to repeal or replace the law. And that's part of the reason why the Washington Post, the blog The Fix, has called your race, the Senate primary in Nebraska, the GOP primary in 2014, one of the most interesting in the country, based in part on what happened in that state in 2012 in the GOP primary, which Deb Fischer stunned a couple of other, perhaps better-known candidates, or at least they were thought to be favorites in that race. But do you see any early parallels between the 2014 Nebraska GOP primary for the Senate and the 2012 Nebraska GOP primary for the Senate?
Great question. I'm not a politician. I'm a business turnaround guy, and as you mentioned in your lead-in, I've been a college president for the last 4.5 years, and we've been blessed that my 130-year-old college, which was going bankrupt when my team and I agreed to this project, we're now the fastest-growing school in the Midwest. So we've got a lot of wonderful things going on. But I'm primarily running because I'm a dad. I have 3 little kids. I love them, and I know it sounds romantic and naive, but I believe in America, and I believe in the sort of constitutional system of limited and enumerated powers we've inherited. And I think we have a moral obligation to leave the country great and free for our kids and grandkids. And I think that business as usual and politics as usual doesn't work. So I'm running for our kids and for the future. I'm not running against anybody. But definitely there are some parallels to 2012 in that, like Senator Fischer, who I respect a lot, I don't come into this as having viewed politics as the center of the world. I think the center of the world happens in the private sector. But I would differ a little bit with the premise of your question that all the candidates in my primary or in other primaries on the Republican side are all just going to say the same thing because we're all for repeal. That's true. But if we give the American people a bad choice between Democrats as the party of big government bad ideas and Republicans as the party of no ideas, Republicans lose every election. We have a problem here where there really was a terribly growing number of uninsured in America in the 15 years before Obamacare was passed. And it's because of perversions the federal government created that were perverting the healthcare market. Republicans need to be the party of constructive conservative solutions. So we absolutely need to repeal Obamacare. There's no fixing this. It's a disastrous monstrosity. But once we repeal it, we have to tell the American people what we're going to do next. Because if all that happens is that Obamacare collapses, or even if we happily get the thing repealed, what comes next, if we don't create a world of portability in the individual insurance market, we're going to get single payer as what comes next. And so conservatives need to be more thoughtful and more forward-leaning than we've been in the past of actually defending a vigorous private sector.
Now, some pundits are predicting that the Republicans could potentially take control of the Senate during the midterm elections, and if that does happen, that could potentially create an easier path to defunding Obamacare or giving Republicans an opportunity to get their ideas out there on the table. But with the law's namesake retaining the veto power until 2016, do you think even if Republicans are able to get control of the Senate, do you think that will give them enough momentum and enough power to get something else through?
Yeah, I think that Democrats in purple states and in red states in the upcoming Senate election in November of 14 need to be held to account, because right now the Democratic Party, we've never passed a major entitlement expansion in all of American history in a one-party way like they jammed through this law from Christmas of 09 to March of 010. And so we need to have full repeal, and we need to have the Democrats be held accountable for the fact that this thing doesn't work. I think you're right. The president is not going to sign some repeal piece of legislation between the November 14 election and the end of his term in 16. But Republicans need to be explaining to the American people that this is perverting the healthcare market. It's driving up costs. It's not driving down on insurance, and it is squeezing out freedom. Obamacare is also the most aggressive assault on religious liberty in American history. We've never forced Americans to fund other people's abortion like Obamacare does. Republicans need to tell the story of what's actually in this 2,300-page law. I've read it. It's worse than you think. And Republicans need to tell that story and have Democrats flee from President Obama, because this legislation doesn't work. And Democrats need to tell the American people the truth.
To follow up on my question, do you think if Republicans, if they have control of both houses, are able to send over a law a couple times, maybe it takes 2 times, maybe it takes 3 times, but a law that makes some fundamental changes to what's wrong or what the problems that the GOP sees are with Obamacare, do you think they can get something through?
Yeah, and I don't think you can fix this law. And so if what you mean is if the Republicans, if we're able to get to 51 in the Senate as we want to do, who knows what the filibuster and 60 vote thresholds will be when Harry Reid keeps changing the rules between now and then. But to speculate on your question, if we had 51 votes and we could pass something, we should repeal this and pass a real reform bill. We shouldn't try to fix it in any way. But do I expect that President Obama is going to start telling the truth about the fact that his signature piece of legislation doesn't work? No, I don't. I don't think it's likely that the president would sign it.
All right, Ben Sasse, running for the GOP primary right now for a U.S. Senate seat in Nebraska. Wish you luck on your race. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for the time.
And thanks for watching Newsmax TV.